Hello and welcome to this video. Today is the feast of the Annunciation. It's a feast that is really dear to my heart. I've got quite a few of them like that, but this is one of the top ones. And I thought I would share my reflections with you today. So it's not just me that counts or sees this feast as a big deal. I mean, the church, it's a solemnity within the church. It's 9 months before Christmas when Jesus was born. It's the day that the angel appeared to Mary and told her she was going to be the mother of God. But I think one of the most important thing, actually, the most important thing to actually remember about today is that Jesus dwelt among us for the very first time. God the Son assumed human nature, assumed human flesh, and then became conceived in the womb of Mary, and now dwelt among us, not just as God, but as man. So it's fantastic, it's exciting, and also it began the countdown to our salvation, because we know that God had promised his salvation from the beginning of time, even from the book of Genesis, when he said the seed of the woman was going to crush the head of the serpent, from original sin. And God had been preparing his people, throughout time. And to think about people like Noah and actually even starting from Abel and then Noah and Abraham. I'm just picking some points in salvation history. This I know me saying that the others were not important, but he had been doing all of that. Then Abraham was there, then there was Isaac, and then there was Jacob, and then there was Joseph into Egypt, and all of these things. And then up until the time of the New Testament, and now on the day of the Annunciation, all that promise he had, and if you went to Mass or you're able to read the Gospel and all the mass readers, you see how he also promised Ahaz that the virgin shall bear a son and his name was going to call Emmanuel. So this was something, and this was like in the very, very centuries, maybe even before Jesus was born. I don't remember how long exactly. So this is it, the culmination of it. And Jesus even said, many prophets, holy people, they long to see this day, that he was there, because God had been talking about this, he had been preparing his people. Then finally, in one very quiet corner in Nazareth, he arrived. So this is one of the most important and exciting times in salvation history. Our salvation was now really, really at hand. The fullness of time had come. So to start with, this is the most important thing. And I think if you look at the Annunciation that way, it might change a little bit of how we view that feast itself. But for me, this is not just the reason why I'm excited about the Annunciation. As you probably already know, I'm interested in supporting women to find holiness in their motherhood journey, to be able to identify what God is telling them, and respond to those inclinations and those things that God is asking them while they're doing their normal day-to-day activities as mom, and their normal lived experiences of motherhood. And in that response, in discerning what God is asking of them and responding to what he's asking of them, they grow in holiness, they grow in relationship with God. They're finding opportunities to actually get close to God and find holiness in their motherhood experience. And I think that the Annunciation is a prime example of how we can do this, or how we can emulate Mary to do this. And again, as you know, probably, the New Eve method, which I created and have been teaching people about, it's modeled on Mary. It's modeled on Mary's motherhood. And this is where we see her assuming that motherhood mantle. So for me, it's really, really exciting. So I'm going to read some from the gospel a little bit, so that I can kind of talk you through what I'm seeing, or the reflections that I've been able that have come to me while I've been reading the gospel and the readings for today. So the gospel starts with: the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a town in Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin betrothed to a man named Joseph of the house of David. So he's telling us the house of David, because Jesus was supposed to be the son of David. So there's the lineage. She was making that very clear. Was making that very clear. And the virgin's name was Mary. And he said to her, "Rejoice, so highly favored," or "Hail Mary, hail, hail full of grace." Yeah, hail full of grace. The Lord is with you. The Lord is with you. So I'm going to back us up a little bit, because it tells us that Mary was betrothed to Joseph. So she was in a sense already married. In those days, the betrothal is like the engagement. Is the real sign that you and this person are going to be married, or going to be living together, or you're going to be couple, husband and wife. And then just the final rites of just actually bringing your bride home, that sealed everything. But this is it. This is saying Mary is already engaged and practically even married in the eyes of the people. So, but then he goes on to tell us that he was a virgin. And, when we read further, we see that Mary herself is a bit confused. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit. But I just want us to go very quickly to where she says, how can this come about since I'm a virgin? Now, if you're engaged and you're going to marry someone, is everybody knows that you guys are already, committed to each other, you're practically married, and someone comes to tell you you're going to have a son, and the son is going to be this person, or do this or do that. I don't think the question you'll be asking will be, how is it going to come about because I'm a virgin? Because you know that you're already betrothed, right? You know that you're married. And throughout the history of Old Testament, when God will send an angel to someone to tell them they're going to have a child, they were already married. So the natural, why does it not consequence, but the natural, what will happen naturally will be, okay, that means when I sleep with my husband, I will have this child. Mary's asking a very interesting question because she's asking, how can this come about since I'm a virgin? And the church tradition had always told us that Mary intended never to actually have children with Joseph. It was like they're going to be married, but they were going to be celibate as well. Now, we're not very sure if this is actually the case because the Bible doesn't tell us, but this gives us a hint that she's not thinking about Joseph as the father of this child that God wanted her to have. And it brought me to thinking that many of us, at some points in our lives, we think, I'm going to be a mother. How's it going to be? Who am I going to get married to? Am I married now? When should I have my child? And I can just see that at some point, Mary might have discerned that God was asking her, even though she was going to be married, but that she was also going to be celibate. And I cannot imagine that it was a very, um, I'm not going to say it was a difficult thing for her to do, but it was not a natural consequence of, or natural. I'm trying to find the word that is not as strong as consequence, because consequence sounds like it's something bad or something evil or something you've done and you're being paid for. It doesn't follow naturally that when you get married, you won't have a child, or you're going to remain a virgin. So at some point, she would have had to think about it, pray about it, and reflect about it, and maybe discussed it with Joseph, and maybe they were on the same page. We don't know. This is just me thinking and reflecting. But the fact that she was asking how this was going to happen since she was a virgin tells me she was intending to be a virgin. She wasn't thinking, oh, should I just, go to Joseph's house now? Should we just, get married and make this really official and I'm leaving his house and have this child? That question was deeper. So already I see that there's a sense of discernment already going on, and she had discerned to some extent that I'm going to be celibate while I'm married to Joseph, and now God has come to her with something else completely different. It's like, I thought and I prayed about this. You showed me that I was going to be celibate and we were going to be married, but we're going to be celibate. And by the way, this was not completely unheard of in the times in the Old Testament. It wasn't the norm, but it wasn't completely unheard of. And I'm going to leave it to you to try and find out if you're really interested in the tradition, then the Jewish traditions and stuff like that. But this is the thinking of some of the fathers of the church. And if I'm able to find some links to explain that a little bit more and further, with churches, the fathers of the church fathers, or tradition, literature and tradition, church tradition that says this, I would try and put some links below if I'm able to find them now, but let's just move on from that. But the point is, she must have discerned at some point that God was calling her to some kind of celibacy within marriage. And then the angel came to her and then said to her, you're going to have a child. And she's thinking, hey, how is this going to happen? So there was another level of, in a sense, confusion, because I thought I had this sorted out. I thought I was going to get married. So think of us, we've got married, or we're not thinking of getting married, or whatever, and then you think you already have the sign that God is asking you not to have a child now, or not to have, or to have your child now, and all of a sudden you're thinking, hey, all the signs are pointing to me doing something else. If this has ever happened to you, if for instance you've had a child, you're thinking, should I have another child? Oh, I don't think I'm called to have another child, and all of a sudden it looks like you might be called to have another child, whether somebody has suggested it to you, whether you yourself are thinking about it, or whether God has just whispered something in your mind to say, hey, I want you to have another child, and you start thinking, hey, how does this work? I thought I was done with this. You're in good company, because Mary was constantly discerning what God was asking of her. And I think it boils down to the fact that God does things a lot of the time in stages. He doesn't always show us the full picture of what he wants us to do. So your motherhood right now, no matter how well you think you understand it, it's constantly unfolding. We constantly have to go back to the table, and by going back to the table, we're going back to God and saying, okay, what next? What do you want me to do next? And he sometimes will show us what he wants us to do next. And we're taken aback and thinking, hey, I didn't think that was what it is. And we have to go back again and reflect. We have to ask him again and again, what do you want me to do? And sometimes doesn't have anything to do with how many children you have, or if you're going to have children or you're not going to have children. Sometimes it's just about the children you already have. Should I send them to this school? Should I send them to that school? Should I take them to this club? Or should I, whatever, all of these things are constant. We are constantly discerning. And so um, I'm not going to go too deeply with how she was disturbed when the angel said to her that the Lord was with her, and she was going to bear a son. So I'm just kind of skipping to where she was trying to discern. And he said, how can this come about? And then the angel told her that the Holy Spirit will come upon her and the power of the Most High will cover her with his shadow, overshadow her, depending on which translation you're using. So this is her asking God, what, why, how is this going to happen? Again, it contrasted to what when Zechariah was saying, hey, how do I know that this is going to happen to me? And I was like, okay, tell me, because I don't believe you. This is like, okay, you want me to do this, I've heard you, but how is it going to happen? What steps do I need to take? Or is this really what you want me to do? That's a completely different thing. And the angel Gabriel explained to her, because at this point he was the messenger of God. And many times when we ask God things, maybe sometimes it's not very clear because we don't have an angel actually appearing to us and telling us this is what God is asking you to do. It would be so nice if we had that, but we don't always have that. And some people, it's you're praying and God tells you something through somebody else or in your heart or something you read or just something, but God is always talking to us because the Holy Spirit dwells in us. So Angel Gabriel says something about the Holy Spirit will come upon Mary. We have received the Holy Spirit in baptism. And as long as we're in the state of grace, He's always there trying to prompt us and guide us. So whenever we are confused or we think God is asking us for something we're not sure, we go back to the Holy Spirit who already dwells in your soul and say, what do you want me to do? And if you feel like maybe the Holy Spirit is not very comfortable in your soul, or for so if you're conscious of a mortal sin, go for confession, bring the Holy Spirit back into your soul. He wants to be there. That's where he belongs. If you're a Christian, if you're a baptized Christian, baptized Catholic. And so talk to him, ask him. We also have the added advantage of being able to go for communion and talk to Jesus himself, receive him and say, what do you want me to do and how do you want me to do this? So that is about the discernment at that point. I just want to also add, even though this is not part of the gospel, that we know that during the course of the Bible, I think at least a couple more times, Mary was pondering things in her heart. So even when the shepherds came and they were saying, oh, they saw the angels and they were singing and it was glorious, she listened to all of these things, but then she pondered it in her heart. She was constantly thinking about these things. When Jesus was missing and in the temple, but he wasn't missing. His parents thought he was missing, but he was definitely not missing. He was in his father's house, and he said, "Why are you looking for me? Don't you know I'll be in my father's house?" And I think again, it occurred to her again, like, hey, something is changing, something is shifting. This is no longer my little boy that just goes with mommy and daddy everywhere. This is now a boy who's asserting himself and reminding her that he has something that is even greater than following his parents, which of course we know that he eventually still went back home with his parents and he was obedient unto them. It wasn't like he was being rude or he was sassy or anything, but again it triggered her to think, ponder things in her heart. What does this mean? We're constantly going to, all throughout our motherhood journey, we're constantly going to be asking, what does this mean? My child, whatever. I'm not going to start looking for examples now, because I know as a mom, that you have to make several decisions every day, whether they should have a treat or not, whether they should go to see their friends or whether they should have a play date or not, whether they should sleep over somewhere. Again, sorry, I know I said I wasn't going to give examples, but there's so many examples. And I know that you're constantly having to make a lot of decisions about your motherhood, about your children. So each time, God, what do you want me to do and how do you want me to do it? This motherhood thing, what's your plan? What's the next step? Maybe I cannot see everything now. If you saw everything, maybe it would be too overwhelming. But like Mary, it unfolds. She discerns. She hears now that her cousin was also going to be a mom. She decided to go because she thought, oh, that's the response. Let me go to someone who might need my help and who I might also share some fellowship with. And then she went there. And when the time came for something else and God wanted her to do something else, she pondered it in her heart. So this is what God is asking. I'm sure she didn't know that she was going to have a child in Bethlehem and she would have to flee to Egypt. But each time God showed her what the next stage of her motherhood journey was, I'm pretty sure that she was constantly pondering it in her heart and saying, so why, what, how? And then she did it. And if we want to model our lives, motherhood on Mary, who was the mother par excellence, the new Eve, then this is how we will also live our own motherhood journey. So, and again, discernment and response. The angel told her, she responded and said, I'm the handmaid of the Lord, let what you have said be done to me. response. Discernment and response. So you want to be holy, you want to find holiness in your motherhood journey, discern what God is asking of you, respond. Discern and respond to do his will each and every. And it's interesting that all that gradings of the day talked about Jesus himself responding to his father's will and doing his father's will. You asked me to come, and I'm paraphrasing now. I'm coming here. I'm coming down to earth. In response to your will, and exactly this is what Mary did. So discernment and response in our motherhood journey. So if you don't already say the Angelus every day, I want to really, really encourage you to do so. To always say the Angelus every day at 12 o'clock at least. I know some people also say it at 6. If you want to do that as well, that's fine. But at least once a day. If you're at work or something is happening at the moment and you cannot say it, say something, if it's just a Hail Mary in your mind, say it. If you cannot, you're in a meeting and you can't leave a meeting, or you're in the hospital, you're teaching, or whatever it is your job is, and you cannot leave at the dot of 12 to say the Angelus, say something that reminds you of, even just a quick Hail Mary, or just go back to that prayer, that incident, that incident, the events that happened on that day. Not just because it's a nice prayer to identify with Mary and ask her for intercession, but as a way to remind ourselves, how can this be, God? What do you want me to do? Pondering my heart, like it helps us to kind of remember to go back to God every so often during the day. So with this, I'm going to end this video. I hope it's been helpful, and I hope that you gain a bit of something from it. And if you have any ideas and thoughts you want to share with me and everyone else who might be watching the video, please feel free to put it in the comment. And if you're not a member of the New Eve Academy yet, but you're somebody who wants to find holiness in her motherhood journey, at least who wants to be supported to do so, because holiness at the end of the day is a gift from God. But if you're somebody who wants to be intentional about trying to find holiness in a motherhood journey, who wants to be intentional about trying to get support for motherhood, have fertility, have spiritual, because what the academy does, following the New Eve method, is to provide spiritual and fertility formation for moms. So it's not to say that you cannot get spiritual support from anywhere else, or you cannot find holiness outside of the New Eve Academy, obviously not, or conceive or plan your children outside of New Eve Academy or without the New Eve method, of course not. But if you're somebody who says, I want to be intentional about this, I just don't, I just want to think about holiness one day and then another day, or I don't just want to think about my menstrual cycles, how to do it. I'm confused. There's just so much in the, out in the world, online, about how to do this motherhood thing. You just want structured support to help you step by step to be the best mother that you could be, that God is calling you to be, to find holiness. You want somebody that helps you to find opportunities to get closer to God while you're walking this motherhood journey. Then I want to recommend and invite you to join the New Eve Academy. It's completely free. Just come in there and you'll get access to lots of resources and information to help you to be the best mother that you could possibly be, but most importantly, to find opportunities to grow in holiness just by being a mom, like just doing your normal mom things. And I look forward to seeing you in there if that's what you feel called to do. But take care and have a lovely day, and speak soon. Bye.